Naksarva Levu, Larry, and a very good morning to all our friends and Pacific family. Today we have an exciting panel before you, AI, artificial intelligence, and I thought we begin by putting our hands up for those who are aware of AI and using AI in their day-to-day lives. Can I get a show of hands? Okay, yes, we are a progressive community. um, so because this is an AI panel, I decided to do an experiment and ask Meta AI to draft an opening sentence to introduce this panel. And Meta AI responds with a draft, and I quote, "Welcome to the forefront of innovation, where artificial intelligence is redefining the boundaries of human potential. In our expert panel today, we will explore the transformative power of AI to shape our Pacific region today and also into the future." So, what exactly is AI and how is it shaping our lives today? There is no consensus definition of AI. In very loose terms, it is defined as the process of making computers do things that we would normally expect only humans to be able to do. And this means that AI encompasses a wide range of techniques, processes, and products. In 2023, the Pacific Islands Forum leaders in their communique recognized the increasing prominence of digital transformation and new technologies and urged a cautious approach to these developments, including artificial intelligence. Just give me the slides. Okay. I want to introduce our esteemed panelists this morning. I have to my left Professor Jenny Patterson, who is the Professor of Law and the Director for the Centre of AI and Digital Ethics, University of Melbourne. Jeannie's teaching and research work focuses on consumer and data protection law and ethics. In the context of emerging digital technologies, she has written and spoken extensively on issues of fairness, bias, privacy, and an existential risk in the emergence of AI and social robots. Turning to my right is Mr. Tukana, Semi Tukana. I've heard so much about the Solosevaki complex, and it's so nice to meet you, sir. Mr. Tukana has had a distinguished career in software design and development. He is the founder of Sole FinTech, a digital financing platform designed to provide fast, safe, and reliable financing here in Fiji, and founder also of the Software Factory Limited, which is a system much different to Sole in that it works with bigger organizations, whereas the Sole FinTech is an individual consumer base. I understand there are exciting plans that Sole is looking into rolling out to the rest of the Pacific, and we've got the whole of the panel today to hear a little bit more about the work and the expertise that you can bring to the discussions today. So I wanted to begin by opening with a question. And the introduction of technological advancements such as AI make our world and certainly our Pacific region smaller and borderless. But how do we navigate this space? To kickstart our Talanoa, I'd like to set the scene and ask AI, is it a promise or peril for the Pacific? Can we turn to you, Professor, to begin?
Yeah, so am I on?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? No, you can hear me now because it's red. So AI is simply a tool. It's mathematics and statistics wrapped up in some software. And if you regarded it as a tool, AI is neither a promise or a peril. It depends on how it's used. Some of the problems that arise from AI arise from bad actors misusing it. Now, that's not a particularly new security question, bad actors doing bad things. The challenge of AI is at this point in time, we don't understand it that well, and it operates fast and at scale. So these factors escalate the security challenges because it means the harms happen quickly and widely, and the responses can be poorly targeted or too slow. We've heard a lot about responses being too slow. That's an issue with AI. And also in line with the dominant theme of this session, is the energy question. It's really energy intensive to build data centres, to build LLMs, which are the basis of modern applications of AI. And so there's a question there about the energy use that goes into the ever-ending expansion of artificial intelligence. And there's a lot of interesting work, I think, about how we make AI sustainable and possibly how we have smaller models rather than ever-growing uses.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I'll turn to you, Semi, to tell us a bit more.
Thank you, Akka. First of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and be a panelist at this August forum. A disclaimer, I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence. Coming from a 42-year background in software design and software development, we are continuously searching for productivity tool. For us, looking at artificial intelligence, it's an excellent tool for productivity. As I will be going to it later on, when we develop software, we are now using AI to help us develop our software. I've just got a message from my tech lead, who is doing a master's in AI, and he said that with our Sole FinTech product, which is licensed by, we got our license from the Reserve Bank of Fiji, we are the first institution to be given digital onboarding approval. First institution in Fiji. Even the banks don't get that approval. But what the Reserve Bank has done, they've mandated that human intervention must always be part of the verification of the identity of the person. But my tech lead have just messaged me a couple of minutes ago and saying he's built an AI to do it through artificial intelligence, but still needs human intervention to actually press and say approve or decline an onboarding of a new member to Sole. So we are excited. Today, I just want to be more practical. One thing I've learned that with new technologies, our leaders need to be protected. Decision makers need to be protected. I've noticed when blockchain came around in about 10 years ago, our leaders and our decision makers were the first to jump into this. And I was part of the receiving end of that, because every time I meet a minister, they'll ask me about blockchain. Are you into blockchain? And I know very well the limitations of blockchain. We need to ensure that our leaders and decision makers are protected from any hype. I see AI as a tool, a productivity and a creativity tool, but the hype will come to an end. And it'll just be a creativity and a productivity tool. So as far as perils are concerned, of course, there are dangers in malicious use of artificial intelligence. We'll come into that in the next part of the questions. So I just wanted to start with that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tukan, and congratulations on that approval. I think it's a big milestone and a lot of lessons for the rest of the Pacific to learn from. I want to turn back to you, Jeannie. I think it's important for us to understand the broad setting, you know, the broad setup of AI. And I understand in my very limited research that I've done, and I'm learning so much from you both, that there is what we call an international governance principles that the OECD provides for the rest of countries to follow or comply with. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how it factors the Pacific?
Well, turn that on. It's the Zoom equivalent of being on mute. So every country at the moment is actually doing their own thing with AI governance. There's a whole lot of diversity about how people respond to artificial intelligence, both in enabling productivity, financial services, and also protecting against AI threats, so cyber threats from AI. What the OECD does is provide some very high-level principles, which effectively are talking about things like protect human dignity and autonomy, have regard to sustainability, and a little bit more granular, so have a human in the loop for decision making. But the OECD principles aren't telling any country what to do. They're a framework. And really what the OECD does is provide a set of resources to countries, but then they need to refine that framework to their own specific values, needs, circumstances. So they need to be operationalised, if you like, and also amended, particularised according to local conditions. So they're a starting point, but they need to be understood and developed according to where countries are. But the point is, I guess, that no country needs to invent its response both to how it will use AI and how it will respond to AI risks on its own. There's lots of models out there.
Just a very quick follow-up question on that, Jeannie, before I turn back to you, to Kana. But in terms of governance and regulatory systems, are countries in the world or in the Pacific required to follow the standards?
No, there's no international obligation about how countries will manage or use AI. And I'll go again, there's both the enabling potential of AI and the threat issue of AI. There's no international law requirement. There's human rights and governance informed principles, but there's no overall framework that's necessary to follow. That said, I think this is a space where we need some regional cooperation so that the standards and principles are interoperational. And that's because, as we know, tech companies are bigger, have more income, they're bigger, they have greater income than the GDP of most nations. And so the response is not regional, the response has to be sort of international, I think.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. To kind of back to you, and I'm not sure if I'm the only person who's just learned about solar fintech, but it sounds like an amazing initiative. And I want to give you the opportunity to tell us a bit more about solar fintech. I mean, it does prove to be a game changer in digital financing. Can you take us through the journey that you began founding this app?
Thank you. For the past 41 years, since been in the software industry, we've been simply confined to building enterprise systems, banking systems, superannuation systems. For the past year, we got our license to operate a fintech. We've moved to consumer-based software, which is really with the Solar Fintech. Solar Fintech is simply a digital banking, financial banking and trading platform. It was designed specifically to help Pacific Islanders budget our money, save, invest, and trade responsibly. Very simple, but the concept is built with our banking engines in the background. You asked about some of the benefits and pitfalls that we've identified. One of the major benefits, as I mentioned before, is that our people can open their accounts, their bank accounts in Sole, remotely, wherever they are. As long as there's internet connectivity, we can open an account in Sole, whether they are here in Fiji or in the Pacific, or our diasporas abroad. Pitfall, number one, identity theft. This is a major risk that we've identified, and we are hoping that with the new development that my tech lead has just sent me, that will somehow mitigate against that risk. Now, another risk which we've identified with Sole, because we are trying to help our remote dwellers. Fiji comprises 333 islands. Most of them are not connected on the internet. So we are rolling out Starlink satellite kits to 1,171 villages in Fiji. And we now identify another risk, maybe not a risk associated directly, but can be directly and indirectly as well with artificial intelligence. These are the most vulnerable people in Fiji. They're in the remote areas, have never been connected onto the internet, and we are bringing this new connectivity to our people. The problem is with deepfakes. There is a problem there because our communities are built on relationships. And we see that if there's a personality, a person in the village that has been the victim of a deepfake, it can really break a community down. And we need to safeguard our vulnerable communities with that. So what we are asking all the communities is to make sure that they connect through our network, because we will try and create a source of truth or a verification of authenticity of whatever they are seeing. We will go into how we need to train and make our people aware. But that's the pitfall number 2 that we've identified. I'm talking about practicality here because we are rolling out into our communities. So as we develop our Sole app, we can use AI generated codes, which will speed up productivity by up to 30%. We can develop our systems that were supposed to be delivered in 16 months in 11 months. So that's about 31% productivity gain for our software company. So these are real productivity tools that we can actually put money, it's money saved. Then we have a problem. When our developers are developing using AI, they find another problem because AI is developing the codes, and sometimes the developers don't even understand the codes that's being developed. Now, that's a major threat internally for a software development company, and also for the people that we serve, because there can be malicious embedded codes that could be intentionally placed into the source code of whatever systems that we are building. So we are really careful in ensuring that embedded malicious codes are not intentionally placed through whoever is the maker of the artificial intelligence. So those are just a brief introduction of Sole and some of the pitfalls that we are finding right now. Some of the pitfalls that we are finding right now, and the need for us to safeguard our systems and also our people. Pinaka.
Thank you very much, Tukana, for touching on those very important issues. Now, I feel like you're not giving us the full story, because I'm actually interested in finding out more about Sole. What's in a name? And I think the reason I raised this is because at the forum, we're all about regionalism and building a sense of community and belonging. And Sole is built on a Fijian concept and word, Sole Selabak.
Sorry.
But I'm sure everyone else in the room is not aware of that.
Okay.
Give us the details.
Sure. I thought this was an artificial intelligence meeting, but Sole is simply the short form for Sol Solevaki, one of the most beautiful lifestyle that we could ever find on the face of the earth. We develop and implement systems in Niue, in Tonga, in Samoa, in Tuvalu, Kiribati, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, and Fiji. This Sole Solevaki concept is the most beautiful concept because in Sol Solevaki there is love and care for one another. No one is left behind. So that's why we call it Sole. Not the Sole from Samoa, it's the Sole from Fiji.
Minakasaka. Jeannie, can we turn to you and talk a little bit more about the issues that were touched on by Semi, deepfake, identity theft? Please educate us.
Okay, so in the background sometimes there's a few slides showing, and if you have a chance, they're not up at the moment, but they're occasionally running through. You might glance at those to have a visual understanding of the issues that we're talking about with deepfakes and identity theft as well as data protection. So the issue that we're facing at the moment, I said, I think earlier, that the thing about AI at the moment is speed, it's availability. A few years ago, deepfakes were possible, but they were only able to be made by people with a lot of technical skill. Now the capacity to make a deepfake is here on your phone, and one of the slides that's rolling through actually shows you one of the common apps. So what's a deepfake? A deepfake is a realistic looking image of a real person doing or saying something they never would have done that's been created using artificial intelligence. Now, it might just be a face swap, so you can get software that swaps a person's face onto the body of someone else. You can get video deepfakes, which create realistic looking videos of people doing things they never would have said or done. And you can get audio fakes, which replicate a person's voice. So if you put all that together, you get a quite realistic and seemingly convincing image of a person, as on the screen at the moment, briefly rolling through, which are completely synthetic, completely made up. And why is that problematic? In some ways it isn't. Deepfakes are things that have been used to make movies for a long time, and they're kind of amusing. They're problematic because they can be used for bad purposes. They can be used for blackmail, they can be used for fraud, and they can be used for political destabilisation. And the reality of deepfake technology, which unfortunately comes with phone connectivity, is quite horrifying. It's horrifying. There's an image of Katy Perry, some movie star and so on. It's horrifying because it can be used to harm people. And we've had a lot of discussion of the role of women. The most common form of deepfake are pornographic images of well-known women. So women politicians, women celebrities, women advocates are commonly represented in deepfake images. Their faces or images are swapped onto bodies of people doing things they would have never done. And that can be used to undermine the integrity of those figures or indeed to blackmail them. In Australia, we have a problem with deepfakes in the schoolyard. Children and young people using deepfake images to blackmail each other or embarrass or humiliate. We have deepfakes promoting scams. Now, I know here in Fiji there's been issues with scams, payment scams, cryptocurrency investment scams. Deepfakes allow those scams to become more effective because they're accompanied not just by a text message or a link or an email, they're accompanied by the image of someone who's trusted and respected, apparently promoting a product that they've used, which is in fact a scam. And finally, we've got political destabilisation, and that's deepfake images of politicians saying things that are quite upsetting or disruptive. So that's the deepfake problem. There's also a problem of what we sometimes call the truth deficit. As scams become as deepfake scams or fraud become more widespread, Deepfakes can be used to undermine the integrity of truthful images. So already we've had examples of politicians who've been caught out doing bad things, claiming that in fact it wasn't them doing the bad thing, accepting a bribe or saying rude things about an opposition member or a colleague. They say, no, it wasn't me, it was a deep fake. So deepfakes can be false information, that's Trump up there, a deepfake Trump, can be used for false information, but they can also be used to undermine truthful information. So that's why people are worried about deepfakes and associatedly identity theft and so on.
Thank you, Jenny. And as you walked us through this, I'm thinking in my head, some of the risks that we may face in the Pacific will include cultural misappropriation, twisting of cultural knowledge and information as well. But is that something that you think we should embed in the security strategies that we will?
Yeah, I think
And we'll dive into
so.
that after, yeah. But please.
Do you want me to talk about a
Yes,
culture?
yes.
Yeah, okay. So I've talked a little bit about deepfakes as in terms of political destabilisation, fraud and blackmail. There's also an issue about culture when we're talking about synthetic images. So generally, if you play around with any image generator, so this is text to image, which you can increasingly get on your phone, the images that are produced are, quite frankly, very white. And they're white people conforming to Western ideals of beauty. So deepfake images of women are usually white supermodels, and I guess for men as well. And so there's a question about the representation of people of different cultures, genders, values, and how they're represented in the images that are created. And the images we see are important to how we understand ourselves, particularly for young people. So on the one hand, we have this problem of people in the regions, Indigenous people, people with cultural traditions not being represented in the images that are produced through AI. The flip side of that is cultural appropriation. So increasingly there's concern that AI that's used to produce images can produce replicas of cultural material. So Indigenous art, Pacific art, cultural artefacts can also be produced as deepfakes, which profoundly undermines, I think, the sovereignty of people over their cultural identity, their cultural artefacts, their cultural history. So there's both a not being represented problem and also this appropriation, this stealing, this approximation of cultural identity through the use of basically deepfake technology.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
Ouch.
That's a lot of information, but I think it helps put into perspective everything we need to understand about AI. I want to come back to you both now and tell us a bit more about how you see the opportunities of AI and what can the Pacific countries get out of it. Maybe I turn to you first, Tukana.
Oh, first of all, I forgot to mention about why we needed to roll out Starlink to the 1,171 villages. The reason is because solar will not work without connectivity. And with that comes the danger of deepfakes. So I just wanted to clarify.
Opportunity and risk, isn't it? Just
Absolutely,
along.
absolutely. What was the question again?
So I guess it's an open question about the risk that we've just heard, but then the need for us in the Pacific to seize the opportunity that this technological advancement brings us. So how do you think the Pacific can get the most out of AI?
It's almost limitless. In medicine, because of our remoteness and the difficulty of access, one of the major areas is language, that we could use artificial intelligence to help us with any language barriers. For me, my heart and passion is in systems development. So I'm just looking at how this will improve our systems delivery in terms of productivity to our island countries. At the moment, we are starting off with Fiji, and we are really encouraged with the opening up of access to satellite, low Earth orbiting satellites. And with that will come lots of opportunities. I was talking to a founder of one of the major radio companies here in Papua New Guinea, and he was saying that they are really utilizing AI for their voice over. They just use my voice or another person's beautiful voice, and they can use that voice for all their adverts or announcements. So they are really fully utilizing AI in that context. There's a lot of other pluses. As for me, software development, 30% improvement productivity. We are happy with that.
So if I'll add to that, I actually think we've got all these images up there of deepfake scams. Artificial intelligence is simply a tool. So there is opportunities, I totally agree, to use it well. And connectivity is not just opening at the Pandora's box of horror and despair. I totally agree, there's lots of opportunities that come from this. And this is the question about governance. And it's a security question, it's not just a civil society question, because governance of AI actually determines whether we end up with, deepfake scams or whether we end up with improved efficiencies. So some of the things that AI can be used for are predicting the impact of extreme weather events, improving agricultural practices in the time of climate change, increasing efficiencies, as Semi talked about, from administrative processes, digitising cultural assets and knowledge, enhancing language preservation and learning, personalised medicine, secure banking, digital identity, responding to cybercrime and cybersecurity. So if we're worried about AI scams and deepfakes, some of the most effective ways of responding to these problems are through using the technology to enhance security. And the very humble point about the digital onboarding is really profound, because one of the problems that people in remote communities, also in Australia, have is that often they either don't have identity documents or it's difficult to establish their identity for the purpose of, say, banking services. What digital technology offers is the opportunity to establish a digital identity, which then reduces, ironically, the amount of personal information that needs to be shared to access government services, banking services, and so on. And that's actually tremendously powerful for people, because they're not reliant on documents and they're not reliant on constantly sharing personal information, which, as we know, can be hacked and stolen. So digital identity of itself creates new opportunities for individuals to engage with financial services, but also government services. It allows them to access immunisation records or social security benefits or establish their education qualifications without constantly having to produce a document to do that. And that's really useful in a very spread out region. Can have interoperability. So in Europe, increasingly digital identity is used to allow people to travel between countries and to establish their identity not just in their own country, but when they move to other countries. And so thinking about, the movement of Pacific peoples for work and immigration, digital identity is tremendously useful for that movement between countries and the movement of funds between countries. So tremendous opportunities if we can make it work. You can make it work, we can make it work.
That's an interesting point, and I'd like to explore that in my research. Thank you, Ginny. But is there a country in the world that is a model when it comes to AI?
There's no country that's in the world that's a model for AI, because it's really new. We're all just going, well, what do we do with it? I mean, it's kind of sprung onto the agenda. Access to AI has been around forever, but access to AI has really only come onto the agenda with phones and the Starlink satellite, actually, which is a satellite that flies a bit lower, so it allows everyday use of the internet, plus the improvement of the cables that are being rolled out across the Pacific. So this is a new problem. There's no country doing it well. Africa and South America actually are quite interesting because they've taken the opportunity, or at least some countries, to really develop a unique, sovereign, localised approach to what they want technology to do for them. But at the moment, it's build your own, quite frankly. That's great, though. And some countries have actually zoomed ahead. I'm thinking of some of the ASEAN countries have zoomed ahead because they've kind of jumped onto the digital infrastructure and barriers that exist in global North nations, for what it's worth.
And of course, the Pacific is becoming part of the bigger global community or global village. How do you propose we safeguard our Pacific ways, our governance, our systems against such pending threats?
Can I start with that? As we focus on the most vulnerable of our people, classroom training or awareness programs are okay. But in my experience in the Pacific, one-to-one is the way to go. We need to make our people aware of the existence of deepfakes and how artificial intelligence can change the voice, can change the content of the voice of the person. We need to make that a personalized approach to our villages, to the remote areas. And my approach would be bring somebody in the village and we change the person's image and we change what he's speaking about. Only then will our people believe. To actually train our people through classrooms setting, our people will still not believe. They will still believe the deepfakes that have been propagated. So I care about the people that are out there, the most vulnerable of our people in the villages. And the more we roll out connectivity, freedom of 24/7 connectivity to these people, the dangers of having them believe what is artificially generated. So to legislate against the use of malicious use of artificial intelligence is going to be, I think it's going to be difficult. I'm not a policy person. I'm just a systems designer. But I'd like to use war games theory, peace by strength, to fortify our systems or protect our systems through either the use of what I mentioned before, certificates, truth, of authenticity, proof of authenticity. We need to start moving into that area so that we can at least mitigate against the risk of deception through deepfakes.
Thank you, Tukan. And you raised an important point because AI is rapidly growing, faster than our ability to mitigate some of this risk. Jeannie, did you want to add to that?
I will add to that because I totally agree about the education. My students, so I'm a lawyer, but I sit in a computer science faculty, and my students can build a deepfake image in about 15 minutes. They need about 3 minutes of voice audio and they can replicate your voice. And they're not even using state-of-the-art. So it's a really useful exercise. I totally agree to show people that. So education is really important in all people, I think, understanding cyber risk. We know that with cybersecurity anyway. I guess I would add that I think that policymakers, decision makers, people like you in the room, civil society groups also need to understand the potential and risks of the technology. And I'm a little bit more optimistic. People go, oh, the technology's changing so fast, how will we ever catch up? It is a cat and mouse game. We can't always catch the bad actors because they're somewhere else. So if you look at the source, there's a slide up there. There's a source of scams is usually countries in the Middle East, in Russia, perhaps North Korea. It's very hard to catch the worst perpetrators of frauds and scams. And the technology is changing quickly, but there's other things we can do. And one of the effective approaches to concerns about deepfakes, scams and so on is not just to target the wrongdoer, it's to target the intermediary. The intermediary, when we're talking about deepfakes and scams, the intermediaries are the tech companies and the banks. And across the world, I think the most interesting work that's being done is requiring tech companies to include markers in the very technology to identify where an image is synthetic. So that means that the wrongdoers who are generating fake images, notwithstanding that it's a wrongdoer, that image itself contains a digital artefact that identifies the image as a fake, which is actually quite useful for maintaining ideas of truth. The other option, the other possibility is to put complementary obligation is to put obligations then on social media platforms where a lot of this material is displayed to look for those truth markers, to actually be aware and be labelling images that are true and images that are false. They're using blockchain actually to keep a record of original news sources so that they know what the original news source was like. If it gets manipulated, it can be traced back to the secure image that was the original so we can identify the change. And tech companies increasingly are being required to be responsive to frauds and scams and actually take material down. Now, all of those measures, education, marking fake images, taking down fake images, all of those only do a bit of the job. But if you put them all together, I used to describe it as a puzzle, but somebody else said to me, it's like, do you know what Swiss cheese is? Swiss cheese are these little squares of cheese with holes in it. So they have holes in it. But if you pile your Swiss cheese up, which you do if you're a child making a sandwich, the holes disappear. So that if you have a layered response to concerns about deepfakes and the misuse of AI, some of those are local and some of those are international, then you reduce the chance of those holes and the profound risks to individuals, to the economy and to the political system. And I think it starts at both ends. It starts with the individuals, also starts with the politicians. Sometimes we talk about coalitions of truth, people working together.
Thank you. I have a question around, the younger generation being the AI generation. Give us some lessons from Australia or from the rest of the world that we can, embed in our systems, education systems. Is this something that we're including in our curriculums across the world? How early, and also what age do we consider the proper age for children to be able to access AI apps?
I'm going to come back to digital identity there, Semi, and I'd love to hear your views on this. In Australia at the moment, there's a lot of talk about whether we should be using age verification for children to access social media and some particularly problematic apps. And that's, I think, a really interesting conversation that's happening around the world. All around the world, people are starting to say that really tech companies should be thinking about the best interests of the child. They should not be targeting children with advertising, particularly for harmful products like sugary products, alcohol, tobacco, and they should not be allowing children to access apps and sites that are without a doubt dangerous for them. So apps that create synthetic pornography, for example, clearly should not be accessed for children. Maybe we should not have those together. But the key to that actually comes back to having a way of verifying children's age, because unfortunately children are a little bit naughty. So if you say to them, you can't use this technology until you're a certain age, children just put in their parent's birthday or whatever. So digital identity is actually quite an interesting strategy also to, I think, keeping children and young people safe. It's a technological solution matched with a legal obligation on tech companies as the intermediaries to act in the best interests of children when they're thinking about how they deploy technology and also digital advertising and content.
All right. Well, thank you, Jenny. And that brings us to our final question. And I think everyone is waiting to understand a bit more about the broader national security next steps. What are the 3 priority recommendations for Pacific countries to include in their national security strategies on AI?
Simi, do you want to go first?
No, you go.
Okay. So we were both asked to come up with 3 recommendations. So actually we're going to hear what you think about these. So in terms of broader national security, for me, and thinking about technology and the fact that it does provide opportunities, I guess I'm going to say one other thing. Everything that we've talked about today in these last 2 days, from climate change to fisheries to migration to international crime, all have technology elements to them. So we can use drones to monitor fishing areas, and we can use facial recognition technology to identify criminals perpetuating crime, and we can use technology to reduce the exposure of people in policing to traumatic images. So the opportunities for technology to contribute to national security and policing are profound, but they need to be done in a framework that respects human rights, cultural values, regional sovereignty. So for me, the security question is to train people in what the capacities of the technologies are and also the limitations. That would be my first one. My second one would be to think about, as I've mentioned, responsibilities on those intermediaries, banks, tech companies, social media sites, which are things that are happening across the world. And then the third one would be, as I've mentioned, to really understand, investigate the way technology is being used to reduce cyber risks. Now, a small country like any country that's not a tech-producing country is limited in those efforts because we're not tech-producing countries. But there are initiatives happening across the region to be demanding responsibilities from the tech intermediaries, to be thinking about the use of technology for reducing both cyber risks and crime more generally. So it would seem to me that those are opportunities for international collaboration and coordination. And I guess the regional interests are quite significant, so that would seem to be an opportunity for sharing information, knowledge and capacity.
You know, very recent, about end of last year, there was a major scam in Fiji. It scammed about 60,000 of our population here in Fiji out of $30 million. That's the amount of money that was involved in the scam. One thing that really disappointed us was the lack of the responsiveness of the government institutions to clamp down on these scams in the country. And I think somehow for those who are building legislations and policies, national policies, we need to secure this part. They needed to act a little bit faster rather than depending on us. We were at the forefront of attacking that particular scam. We had to write to the ministry, we had to write to the Reserve Bank of Fiji to do something about it. No, they only came into the picture after it had crashed. And that's what is really disappointing for me. There's also other scams happening in one of the current payment service provider in the country. And my disappointment is the lack of government intervention in saying, let us audit the source code. Because as you mentioned about the responsibility of tech companies, yes, we are software development companies. We should be able to give our codes to be audited by whatever independent body so that they can verify the integrity of the preservation of the integrity of the account balances for each member of whatever digital platform that is available there. So auditing source codes, to me, it's maybe controversial, but it's something that is essential, especially now when we are going into artificial intelligence. The other part where I mentioned about embedded malicious codes, unintended by the tech team, but just somehow the artificial intelligence, generative AI or whatever, had built a ransomware code and embedded it into our system. We really need to come down strong on these kind of things and be able to identify who are the real culprits, because it can really damage reputations of a tech company or a digital payment platform. Identity theft, you've already mentioned that. Unauthorized business intelligence gathering through embedded systems is something also that we are really looking out for when we use artificial intelligence in building systems. I'm glad you brought up that note on the children's
Safety, yeah.
verification of age, because we haven't moved into that area yet. Just at the moment, just verifying you as the person. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because we are about to move into schools. We're about to talk to the ministry to open Sole to schools, to allow school children to open Sole accounts. And we need that kind of verification tools to be available. So apart from that, again, the training of awareness of our people in the vulnerable areas of our communities.
Thank you, Tukana. You want to add to that?
No, that was great.
No, I'm learning so much from this, and I know we're keeping our audience waiting, looking very eager to ask some questions. So I'm going to open the floor and allow questions from our participants. And I see a number of hands. Can we go to James and then at the back? Yep. And one over there. Yep. Transform. Where are the roaming mics? Can we? Yep. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks very much to the presenters. I think when we're talking about the advantages of AI, there's a lot of focus on efficiency and productivity and so on. I wonder if the panelists could comment maybe a little bit more about, are there opportunities to enhance accountability, the accountability of governments? Because there's obviously a risk that governments implement new laws and regulations, and does that change the relationship between governments and citizens? Thank you.
Well, I think your question is about accountability of governments. I think increasingly governments are interested in using technology for efficiency gains. And it's really important, first of all, so I'll go internal and then external. So how do governments use the technology? It's really important, if governments are thinking about using technology, that they have clear policies for the governance of that technology, but also for procurement. Because what we've observed across the world is that governments don't develop their own technology when they're looking for solutions, whether that be a payment system for government payments or an interface for individuals who want to interact with the government, or even internal systems for monitoring outputs. Governments usually are buying that technology for someone else, and that technology often comes with very little transparency about the codes, the source codes, the data, the use, what's even happening with the data. So first of all, I'd say that governance policies about the use of their technology, but particularly about the procurement. Governments need, if they're procuring technology, need to make sure they know where the data's going, who gets to keep the data, and also are able themselves to audit the outputs of the technology. Can we use technology to monitor government performance? Yeah, we can. We can use technology to monitor government performance in terms of what governments want to do. Are they performing? Are they coming through with their own statements of policy and ambition? How is money being spent? What's the ratio of men to women? Who's being employed from where? All of those things can be traced with data and digitised. The comment I would also make, though, is that artificial intelligence is just maths and statistics, so it does not replace human judgment. So it's also important that we don't reduce government to simply a set of statistical performance measures, and we understand the role of government in exercising judgment, reflecting communities, showing empathy, sensitivity, and so on to the communities they represent. So you can monitor government performance, but much of the role of government is about policy, which perhaps AI can't provide insights about.
We'll go to the back and kindly identify yourselves for that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Michael Crow. I'm the Regional Security Advisor here at the Forum Secretariat. In the Buoy Declaration Action Plan, we have a key focus area on cyber security. It's got 5 key proposed actions. One of them is to promote safe online behaviour and provide awareness to those that are using technology to engage safely. Are there different messages we should be sharing with Pacific peoples as to how they interact with AI compared to how they interact just generally in the cyberspace? Thanks.
I think there are actually. I think they're interrelated. So when we're talking about cyber secure practices, we're often talking about two-factor authentication, not using USBs, knowing where your data is, having a cyber response plan. Inevitably, every body that holds data will be subject to a cyber attack, and we probably can't, in fact, identify or apprehend the people subject to the cyber attack. We probably can't even stop the cyber attack. What we need is to reduce the opportunities for that cyber vulnerability and have response plans. AI is a little bit different, actually, because AI is in our phones. So those sort of hygiene practices that we talk a lot about with cybersecurity don't apply when we're talking about AI, because we've got it. We're using it. It's embedded in our very interaction with the thing that most of us carry around the most. This is the AI. It's not somewhere else. It's not anywhere else. It's in the phone, and so therefore, I think the conversation is actually different. The conversation is about scams, and the conversation is also about cultural identity, and the conversation is about the representation of women, and the conversation is about the best interests of children. And I think those are actually different conversations, related but different.
Can we go to transform and then after?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. There's some AI and technology is here to stay with us. 10 years ago, not many people had mobile phones. The level of penetration of technology in the region, in the villages, is incredible. So just imagine what's going to happen in 10 years' time. So I think we cannot ignore the possibilities and the potential. And what I was more interested in was really the future and how we can use technology, whether it's AI or IAE or whatever you call it, because our children and younger people are very smart. They're not going to university. Young boys and girls in the village are doing all these things that we're doing there without going to university.
You don't need to go to uni, no.
The level of innovation, creativity is just incredible. Having said that, of course, there are issues with the quality of education, the standard of English, but I'm amazed by the quality and the ingenuity and the creativity of our young people. So the question I really have is when we look at the impacts of climate change going to 2050, the Pacific Island countries will be, suffering from agricultural productivity. It's anticipated with the sun getting hotter, food production, livelihood, and also health. So the question is, how can we use these? And I think that's where the conversation really should be aimed at, is to how can we use this technology to actually improve food security, smart agriculture, smart agroforestry, smart fisheries, and more importantly, smart health and telehealth. And I just imagine whether it's possible, and this is a question I have, is it possible that in the future, because of our limited health facilities here, that it might be possible to have you're in Singapore, you're a surgeon in Singapore, and you conduct through a robot an operation on a patient in Suva or in Honiara. Once we get to that point, I think the development of the Pacific Island countries, now this is the conversation that I feel that policymakers, businesses should be having about the future and the shape and what the configuration of the future is going to be like. So, is it a yes or a no?
So I'll jump in and then I'll hand over to the person that's actually doing it. So I think that's exactly right, but it's like anything. We need to know what the risk. You can't have AI without the risks, but you're quite right. We're probably at the worst time at the moment because it's new. At the moment, we're like, whoa, there's a whole lot of risks, and we haven't even begun to understand the benefits. But the benefits are certainly there. And that's a really optimistic story for young people who are creative. And you don't actually need to go to uni to drive technology. And I'll say something about, no, you go next to me. No. Okay, I was going to say remote health I reckon health is the best story about AI, health and perhaps agriculture. So in Australia, where I come from, we're a big country. We don't have enough doctors in the regions, and we also have a shortage of mental health support. So telehealth and digitised mental health support are really important and big. And that point about can you have a specialist surgeon guiding health support in the regions? Yes, you can, but do you know what you need? You need connectivity. So we need those satellites and those cables to work really well. So yes, is my answer.
Can I just add to what Professor Jeannie has mentioned? I'm actually worried about the future. My tech lead came and told me that the team that have been working on the Masters in AI project have been developing their codes fully using AI. Except my tech lead. He's actually coding himself. The problem is this, as I mentioned before, the code that was generated, these people cannot understand it. So how are we going to maintain systems and codes in the future if it's totally built by AI? And you can't tell AI fix this problem, or maybe that is possible. When he told me that last week, I was really worried. Prior to that, I was worried about the level of mathematics in our universities in the Pacific, the decline in mathematics in the Pacific. So yes, AI is going to be here to stay. In 10 years' time, we may look back and say whether this particular area was okay or not. But I'm just worried in my particular small sphere of work where we develop systems and using AI totally, it can pose a danger in the decline in critical thinking in our people. So that's possibly an area that I just want to say it's going to be here to stay, but there's certain dangers, especially in a specific context, like in our area, developing software.
That's true. If you talk to any tech team, they say there's a shortage of talent. That's the people who can create and test the technology. So certainly that's right. We need to invest in people who can do data. But that, I don't think that's is insurmountable. I think there's a great deal of interest from young people. And I'll just say one final word. We actually want cross-disciplinary teams. You want people with different skills working together. No team interested in policy should not have a tech person in it. They should have a tech person in it, and no team doing tech should just be tech. They should have people from civil society groups, local people represented. That's where we get the best responses for precisely the reason that you're mentioning. Semi?
We'll go to the lady at the back. Thank you.
Hello. Sorry. I'm just, my question is posed on a comment that was made in the earlier panel in relation to legislation playing a catching up role rather than being proactive and, and addressing the issue through legislation. I know that IA, I don't know much about IA, so I'm very, very grateful for all the information that you've provided from the panel. Thank you very much. But I'm just thinking, and I know it was intended, from what I hear, this program or this process was intended for the good. But as I've heard, there are times that it may be used by some to, committed as a crime through various regulations or legislation. But as small island states, we of course draft our legislation. We pitch our legal policies based on lessons learnt from other, bigger countries. We have model laws out there and I think those model laws are created subject to problems that have happened. But is there anything that we can do as small island states with all that information you've just imparted that we can start looking amongst ourselves, or we know there may be, as everything else that's created on this earth, there are risks and there are problems and positive impacts. But is there any way that we as small island states, in the spirit of Boyd Declaration and all that we can start working on now to address those problems and as a consequence, have some kind of regulation or legislation in place that we can start working on now? Thank you.
Do you want to go first? Okay, so it's such a big question, and it seems, I think, insurmountable. I still think this starts to some degree with policy and education. So AI is actually a tool. So a lot of the laws that we already have about fraud apply to people who use technology for fraud, in fact. So surprisingly, I think that a lot of law does already apply to the misuse of AI, as well as a lot of policies can be accommodated to encourage the useful elements of AI. The problem with law, as you've just addressed, is if we write law about technology, it's probably out of date before the ink is dry. So what a lot of countries are doing, with the exception of the EU, is relying on government statements, regulator directives actually, about how AI should be used within their own institutions, and their priorities that should be given to law enforcement. And I think that is actually quite a useful approach. I think the one thing that every country needs is data protection law, because data protection, AI only works through data. So it's the food for AI. So the key, I think, is data protection law, and then actually good policies around priorities and enforcement. I know that sounds optimistic, but that's in fact, that stops that problem of not being able to keep up. In fact, but when it's really important, I think, at this point in time to have regional cooperation, because AI doesn't stop at anybody's borders, you know. So regional cooperation here on priorities, training, enforcement is key.
Can I just add to that? Coming from small island countries like Fiji and Cook Islands and Tuvalu, we need just to keep it simple. That's the key. I've seen problems with too many legislations. It's stifle innovation, stifle growth. We know the dangers. Just keep it simple. Focus on the basics. And we try to enforce whatever legislation on certain matters. You know, when AI started coming, and I'm associated very closely with the current government here in Fiji. I've been asked a lot about technology, and I'm saying to them, let us fix the basics first, our various systems in the country first. AI, it will come. We know certain dangers. We just need to make people aware. Let's fix the basic systems, immigration systems. Let's fix births and deaths in marriages systems before we start looking at the tertiary level of artificial intelligence. Keep it simple. We know the dangers of artificial intelligence. Write up for you experts in legislations and policies, write something simple. We can't bring things from abroad and map it directly to our small countries. No, it's too, they're living in another complex society. We've got people that are vulnerable at this point. Do something to make them aware of the dangers and move forward. Let's not wait for major legislations and things like that. Keep it simple, focus on the basics, and move forward.
We have a question.
Thank you. Michael again from the Forum Secretariat. Also in the Boy Declaration Action Plan, we have a proposed action to all do our best to accede to the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. At the same time, a lot of our members are also looking or engaging with the UN Open-Ended Working Group on safe and secure use of ICT. You mentioned before there are some efforts going on to develop international frameworks on safe use or engagement or regulation of AI. Can you give us a hint as to what some of those are that you would recommend we look into a bit further?
So the OECD framework, the OECD has a set of principles around safe and responsible AI, which are a good guidance. At the moment, the real driver in this space comes from the US and the European Union. So in the US, there's an executive order from President Biden, which says that any tech company that wants to engage with government services has to have systems and processes in place to ensure that the products that they're producing and using are helpful to people, not harmful. And that actually includes labelling deepfakes as capacity to label synthetic content as synthetic. So that Biden order has going to have a ripple-on effect across the rest of the world. The EU has legislated for that outcome. It also requires high levels of testing, transparency and accountability from companies that are either developing or deploying technology. And what I would say is that actually for countries in the rest of the world that don't have that legislative clout of the US or the EU, what would be useful would be to try and almost build on the requirements that are coming out of the US and the EU. So companies in the EU that deal with the EU have 2 years to get their act together, and then they have to place an EU trust mark on technology that they're making available to the market. So it would seem to me that if you actually want to build on international efforts, it's building on things like that trust mark and saying and understanding what that means for countries that are importing the technology. And similarly from the US, companies that have satisfied the US State Department and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, so companies who've satisfied those requirements, that should be the demand of tech importing companies. So don't reinvent the wheel, but actually understand those international initiatives for safe and responsible AI, and then use those in any procurement contract that the local governments are themselves engaging in, including for security purposes. That would be my suggestion. And then I guess also talking the policing side of AI is really interesting as well. Yeah. Does that help?
I think so. I'm just writing so fast on my
Oh, I'm
hands.
so sorry.
No, that does help. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one last question from this side.
Okay. Bolovinaka, and thank you for the insightful presentations. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts, I think, and reflections from the session. I think one of the key things that we're very mindful is that AI is not new. So we've had it, Google Translate, Google Maps, predictive texting, but obviously with ChatGPT and the hype that came with that, and as Mr. Tukano was mentioning, we now see the sort of the vast opportunities that's there. So I think that's quite clear, and we've seen that. And I think just some stats from last year was that only 12% of the SDGs are actually on track. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to use AI to be able to address that gap. With regards to some of the global policy reforms, and I think you had shared that as well, Professor, I think one of the key things that we're looking at as well is the United Nations General Assembly resolution on AI, which was the first of its kind that came out. There was over 120 nations that had supported that. Fiji was also a co-sponsor of that. We know that there's the G7 policy that's there as well, AI for Good that ITU has, and there's the AI convention that the Council of Europe has as well, which is also quite interesting. I was actually at a meeting last week, and the African Union is actually asking for them to come and do a regional sort of block. And one of the questions that I had was, okay, what about other sub-regions and regions as well? So I think that's an area that we also need to look at as a region, because as was mentioned, we don't have to recreate things. And like for us, we are predominantly the consumers or at the end of that supply chain. So understanding what resilient supply chain means with regards to new and emerging technologies is also something critically important that we need to be mindful of and understand, and then make sure that we have that innovative sort of platform and environment for our private sector to be able to thrive in that space. So sort of my first sub-question is, what are your thoughts and predictions with regards to the AI, the Council of Europe AI Convention that's there? I know that the UN is also looking at that, but I think that might take some time as well. The second thing that you had mentioned in terms of the deep fakes, which I think is something that we're also looking at in terms of the malicious use of digital technologies, including through the use of AI. I mean, one of the most interesting cases I saw was the 25 million scam that happened because the finance officer, and this was in Hong Kong, the finance officer thought that he was receiving instructions through a video call from his chief financial officer and other people in the company, and that was a deep fake. And so he transferred all of that money out, and we see a lot of the voice calls happening in the Asian sort of markets. And I think it really goes down to what was mentioned earlier in terms of inculcating that culture of cyber hygiene, and what was mentioned earlier by both panelists in terms of the need for us to do better, but also the fact that it is a collective responsibility. And even as individuals, we do have that sphere of influence. I think my take on that would be not necessarily just talking about deepfakes, because it can get overwhelming as well, but really focusing on asking those questions, because deepfake really it makes it more real to a person, but these are just sort of old tactics that are being sort of sophisticated in the sense that, like, as you mentioned, instead of a link, now you have a person telling you through the phone or through a video, but being able to pause and ask, is this what this person, is this normal for this person? And it brings back to mind a case that came out in the papers. I think it was in Singapore, where a grandfather had said that he had gotten a phone call, and that was by way of a scam, where the person was saying his son or his grandson had said, I'm stranded, I need money. Can you send it to this account? He was going to send it. Then he paused and then said, okay, put the phone down. Then he called his grandson. The grandson was playing a video game at his home somewhere. And then that's when he had mentioned, it sounded just like you. So I think these are things that we're foreseeing, but pausing and having that ability to ask whether or not that's the case. And we also see this even earlier on when we saw in Facebook where you had the ask 10 questions. Tell me about yourself. What is your favorite color? What is your mother's maiden name? And people would that send it to the next 10 people. All of these data is online. You're thinking you're sharing about yourself, but you're actually telling them what might be your password or your security question for your bank account, because that was usually the questions. So we see a lot of these things coming up, and I think that's critically important, and I think that's something that we definitely need to work on. I think the final point is that you mentioned in terms of the balance between the opportunities and the risk, particularly in terms of the energy consumption and the amounts of energy that it would need. Could I get some more information? I know you'd spoken about smaller models, but what are some other sort of considerations that we can look at? Because I think this is also a question that the Pacific can play a big role. AI is a huge topic, but I think this is a niche area that we need to really focus on and getting more sort of information on that. So I think that's just my last question. But as a final point, maybe to recommend, Stanford University has an AI index, and I think they've just released it as well. So I think that would be a useful tool that we could also consider as we're trying to think through this massive theme. But thank you.
Professor, you've got 1 minute. I'm sorry. Thank you.
I'll be really quick. So thank you. I mean, I think that was such a beautiful summary. So thank you so much. And so actually optimistic in that depth of resources that you've preferred people through. I think the thing with AI governance, whether it's coming from the UN or the OECD, is that it's very general. It's really general, and I think that the challenge for countries is to particularize that for their own regions. So I think Africa is a really good example, and so is South America, because we're seeing those, what we would call the global south, bit patronisingly, develop their own stance about what AI means for them, and I think that is really powerful. So I think, for me, the most exciting thing is what's happening at that regional level. That takes me to scams. Yes, scams have been around for a while. We need coalitions of truth from the individual to the government. And your last point was the energy use. The energy use of AI is tremendous. Don't reinvent things. Do not reinvent your own large language model. Do not reinvent your own technology. Do not reinvent your own law. There are models everywhere, and we don't need the biggest AI in the world to have really useful AI that can improve the efficiency of government, healthcare services, the preservation of cultural artefacts and large language and language learning. And I think that's where the exciting stuff is coming in. And finally, the Stanford material is really useful, but the US has a particular focus on innovation that I, as a not UNS person, would always be a little bit, take it with a grain of salt, which you know.
Just 2 quick points to close. I think we're reminded in this session that AI is here to stay. There is a lot of work to do in the Pacific. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and please join me in thanking our very knowledgeable panelists this morning.
Thank you.